Good afternoon, everyone. Late afternoon. If you don't know me, I'm Dr. Freely. I'm the director of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education Center, and also professor in religion and philosophy. So I'm really, really delighted to have Dr. Alexander Hinton here today. And there are a few reasons for that. As you know, we have had a completely different administration that has taken over since January, that was voted in by 80 million people. We have a very polarized society today. And our mission as LaSallians and also HDI is to build inclusive communities. Now, building inclusive communities are really important because even if you do not agree, we can still have dialogue. I've been doing this through the whole tension between Jews and Muslims today in terms of Israel and Gaza, where there, as you know, there's a lot of polarization. And as an educator first, and someone who really cares about you guys, the future, you need to have dialogue, even if you disagree. And you have dialogue by not just opinions, but informed opinions, to back up what you're saying, to have the strength, the acumen, and intelligence. And one of our LaSallian pillars is to build an inclusive community. Our other one is to recognize human dignity in everybody. And to me, even though I'm not Catholic, I am LaSallian, because all of those principles define who I am and also where I have committed to teach and to live my life. So that's why this is such an important event for me, why it's important for the Holocaust, Genocide, Interfaith Education Center, and for all of you, because we're here to have discussion with Dr. Hinton. So Dr. Hinton is from Rutgers University. He's a distinguished professor of anthropology and director of the Center of the Study of Genocide and Human Rights at Rutgers. He is also the UNESCO Chair on Genocide Prevention and the award-winning author or editor of 17 books, oh my God, including most recently, It Can Happen Here, White Power and the Rising Threat of Genocide in the US in 2021, Anthropological Witness Lessons from the Khmer Rouge Tribunal 2022, and Perpetrators Encountering Humanity's Dark Side, Stanford 2023. Most recently, he received the American Anthropological Association's Anthropology in the Anthropology in Media Award in 2022, a 2024 Lifetime Achievement Award for the International Network of Genocide Scholars, and an H.F. Guggenheim Distinguished Scholar Award, also in 2024. Dr. Hinton has been on our campus before. I hosted the Consortium of Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights, which at that time I was the co-director. So he remembers the view, but it's always difficult to get to Manhattan College in the right building, as you guys know. But let's give him a warm welcome. Thank you, Alex.
Hold for one moment, please. Hello, thanks for your patience, and don't emulate me for those who are here and I said, oh, I'm working on a slide right beforehand. Don't tell anyone, although I guess everyone knows now. So before I get into the presentation, I just want to begin with a slight preface. Free speech, inclusion, patriotism, DEI and CRT, equality, diversity, faith and family, equity, liberty, he, her, they, them. Okay, and I'll circle back to that at the end of my presentation, or you can ask me. So yeah, before I launch into things, you know, I went over these remarks. I want to thank your illustrious professor, Dr. Freedy, who, as I hope you know, is a legend in the field, path-breaking scholar, just someone who's so respected and who I respect. You're really lucky. Anyways, have her on campus. Let's give her a round of applause. Yeah, so thank you for welcoming me. Thanks all of you for coming. And I'd like to thank as well the Center for the Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education Center for hosting as well. I'm not checking my text messages. So people always think you plug your phone, but I'm not doing that. To honor the J6 hostages recently released by Emperor Trump, I constructed 4 pipe bombs out of 1x8" threaded galvanized pipes, end caps, kitchen timers, some wires, metal clips, and homemade black powder. I recently placed one inside a room I rented at the JW Marriott at 131 Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington. It's rigged to explode as soon as the next door opens. I also shoved another pipe bomb down the toilet in the bathroom, nearby where the principal First Summit is being held. Mark Cuban, Chris Christie, John Bolton, George Conway, J. Michael Luddig, Adam Kissinger, Michael Steele, Jeff Duncan, Bill Kristol, Expletive, Frank Faluzzi, Glenn Kirshner, Norm Eisen, and especially Michael Fanon all deserve to die. In that spirit, the third device has been placed inside Michael Fanon's mother's mailbox scratched out, which is rigged to explode when the mailbox opens. Currently, I am nearby John Bolton's home. By the time you've read this email, the final device will have been deposited inside of his mailbox and rigged to explode in the same way. To my family, I simply did what I needed to be done. MAGA. So did anyone hear about the bomb threat that took place this weekend? I was in Washington, D.C. At 2 conferences, actually. The first and the longer one is called CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference. How many of you have heard of CPAC, out of curiosity? Anyone? A couple? Well, how many saw Elon Musk with the chainsaw? On social media, you didn't see him waving around that chainsaw? Only 1 or 2 people. How about Bannon when he did the wave? More people saw the wave. Yeah, so that was at CPAC, which is it's a conservative group that's been meeting for many years. Originally, Ronald Reagan was sort of the figure that was valorized there, and they still have a Ronald Reagan dinner. But now President Trump, who I think has given like a dozen speeches, maybe more there over the years, is the dominant figure, and some people have gone from calling it CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, to calling it TPAC, the Trump Political Action Conference. Now, at CPAC, there's another group of conservatives who they refer to often as rhinos. Has anyone ever heard of the term rhino? Republican in name only. So the group, you've had this fissure within the Republican Party, and this split-off group who many people at CPAC call rhinos, and they deride them, lambast them, despise them. they started holding a counter conference at the same time as CPAC. And that was held, as you heard, at the Marriott Hotel. Yeah, so I went to CPAC, and I'll talk a little bit about ethnography. I'm an anthropologist. But then on Sunday, after CPAC was over, President Trump was the last one to speak and ended. I spent the next day at Principles First, the second conference. So a little bit of background to that email, which made a lot of news. That was Jim Acosta. You can see his little tweet there that he put out. So let me give you, to sort of understand this moment, we have to go back a little bit further. So when President Trump came to power, I assume everyone still remembers the Capitol insurrection or unrest, depending on your political position. Often now with students, if I say, do you remember Charlottesville, Unite the Right? A lot of people haven't heard of it. It's a little bit further out of the range. That was in 2017, shortly after Trump 1.0 was in motion. And that was when a number of far-right extremists wanted to unite the right. You had neo-Nazis, Confederates, and a bunch of different groups, this thing called the alt-right gathered. So that's a little bit further in the distance. But the Capitol insurrection, you remember. So as you may have heard, the people who were involved and who were sent to jail, which included the Proud Boys and the leader of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio. How many of you have heard of Enrique Tarrio? Anyone? A few? Yeah. So they were all released. When I was at CPAC, Steve Bannon, another figure, and members of the posse, don't raise your hand if you are, we don't want to know if that's what he calls people listening to him on the radio. He has a thing called the War Room, and he was playing live from CPAC. And he had the head of the Oath Keepers, who was actually an interesting character. He went to Yale Law School and ended up at the head of this militia. He was speaking there along with another, so in the MAGAverse, if we will, they're called J6ers. If you talk to people in a red bubble, right, versus a blue bubble, you'll have insurrectionists versus the J6ers, who are called hostages, political prisoners, and sort of people on the other side will refer to, the insurrectionists. So, it's one interesting thing about language, right? Like a word itself can catalyze very different associations for people on different sides of the political divide. And people often don't know that they're using language that may be upsetting to other people. I wrote a article, I published a lot of stuff in this public-facing, open access publication conversation, and I did one, and they always give the titles to your articles, you don't choose them. And I think this was like 4 or 5 words that will trigger Trump supporters or something like that. I can't remember what they called it. If I did the title, I remember. But yeah, so language itself is something, and I also, with my opening preface, I was trying to raise that a little bit. Yeah, so when President Trump, first day he was in office, immediately he pardoned all of the J6 insurrectionists / hostages / political prisoners, depending on how you regard them. For him, they were political prisoners. And they came to CPAC. I've been going to CPAC this is my 3rd CPAC. So the reason I was working on my last little slide, which is actually the one you're looking at, I forgot to put in this slide, so I had to throw it together, is because this literally just ended on Sunday. So this is all what I'm talking to you about now is, it's new. I've never given this presentation before. Yeah, so we've got the J6ers who are there. The first day of the conference, I was down getting a meal in the lobby, and I looked over and I was like, whoa. I said, that's Terrio. I recognized him. I looked over and there was someone. The Proud Boys have a very distinctive logo. It's like gold laurels. They sort of tore down a black church in DC, and they lost the rights to their logo. So what they've done is they erased the PB in the logo, but now they still keep the gold logo. And I looked and there was someone else with a hat, and I was kind of like, oh, okay. So I knew, there was rumor that all the J6ers were there. If I'd had a little more time, I would kind of slide up where someone says, we're treated like heroes here. And they are. Loud applause. They're almost like superstars. So that's sort of the CPAC context. Bouncing over, so Terrio, I didn't really plan to talk about the Proud Boys in a bunch of depth, but I'll just give you a quick thing. Within the Proud Boys, there's sort of different factions about who are the real Proud Boys, and they battle with each other about this. And Terrio's a little controversial because he's said to be an informant. And a lot of groups sort of say he's not legitimate and he's now out of prison, sort of trying to claim his place. So on the second day of CPAC, so they partied in the bar at CPAC at the Gaylord Hotel, and did fight chants and different things. If you look on social media, it's all over the place. Second day, they went to DC to announce that they were going to sue the Department of Justice. So in the coming months and years, there's going to be a J6 insurrectionist / hostage / political prisoner, whatever your view is, lawsuit against the government for the corrupt lawfare state. So they announced this. When they were there, this is right, Terrio had a bad day. Someone held a phone up to Terrio and he hit the woman's arm, and he got arrested. Came back and he went to the hotel on Saturday where they were holding the Principles First. I realize that's not there. So we've got Principles First, where the quote unquote rhinos are. That's the language the CPAC people would use to describe them. So he went over to that conference at the Marriott. And how many of you have seen the police officer, Fanon, who's heavily tattooed? He's on CNN, he's often in the media. You would probably recognize him. But he was there speaking along with another Capitol police officer. So again, you had different militia groups and a wider range of people, many of whom were then in prison fighting against the Capitol Police. You probably remember those images. This was one of the people who was fighting to defend the Capitol. So he went up and started yelling, got on social media. So then Sunday, when I went there, we had the bomb threat in the middle of the conference right before Bolton was about to speak, who is also regarded as a rhino. He's a international affairs. He's had a number of different positions in the government, and he's opposed to Trump. So they did this bomb threat. Now, I went outside at the time of this. I was speaking to another guy, Rich Logis, who is a former member of, self-identified member of MAGA, who left MAGA, and then he established a group called Leaving MAGA. And if I'd had a little more time, I would have gotten his logo up there. I had to actually, so when you do research, you can't just report on your conversations. You have to go back and talk to people and get their permission to talk about a conversation. So I also had to do that. And he said it was fine to mention our conversation. So yeah, I mentioned being over at CPAC, and he was sort of trailed by a lot of reporters. At these things, lots of reporters, and everybody was formerly a member of MAGA. I know him, from research. And there were journalists, they were talking, and we got going, and he sort of tells the story of how he left MAGA. He was talking to one of the journalists. But part of the sort of understanding of how we got into it, that we have this term we use, bubbles, right? We're all in a bubble. And I think everyone knows what that means, though it's only when you really go outside of your, if you will, social media ecology that you can be exposed to different sorts of ideas. So many people, and again, this differs generationally, but for, I think, older people especially, who in this area, a number of them read the New York Times, listen to National Public Radio, and get certain sorts of things. I've got so many topics I could talk about. I've got to stay on focus, but there's nonstop critique of the legacy media. This came up in the last election. This was going to YouTubers and different things. But yeah, we're all in these bubbles. And he said, I was in this MAGA bubble. And that's the only information I got. Constantly, MAGA. And everyone knew that you couldn't cross with the message. Even if you knew something was going on, you knew you weren't supposed to speak with us. And I could go and talk about my Cambodia research and how this came up in that context, but there's no time, so I won't. You can ask me if you want the Q&A. But he said it was only during COVID, and he was a supporter of DeSantis, and DeSantis changed his COVID. He's the governor of Florida. Changed his his policies on COVID. That he began to slowly have a situation where his sort of hardcore beliefs were unsettled. And he also made the comment, it was us and them. Like you were part of MAGA or you were out of MAGA. And he's not just any MAGA supporter. He was someone who wrote articles in the media. He was, I think he had a podcast, maybe he was on YouTube. So, he was a not high-ranking, but sort of a mid-level MAGA person. So we were talking, and I said to him at one point, I know exactly what you mean, because I've been inside the MAGA bubble since Wednesday when Steve Bannon held a pre-event. I don't know, is Steve Bannon someone who registers? He runs the war room, maybe for some people. He's the one who did the salute, so maybe everyone remembers him from that. But I was there from Wednesday through Saturday. I'm an anthropologist. I understand, I've been to CPAC before. During the election, I went to like a dozen MAGA rallies, all the way from a Trump rally in Wisconsin to the remote hills of Pennsylvania, different sorts of MAGA rallies. And I've written about MAGA. But by the end of the 4 days, this has happened to me every single time, I've been in that bubble and it all makes sense to me. And it's convincing. And so I had this moment with him when I said that to him, I didn't really think about it. He looked at me and I realized we kind of connected where everyone else says, oh, you're a member of MAGA, I could never be that way. Just as people from MAGA might look over at those they view as radical leftist socialists, which is the language that's used of us and them, including many academics. It was a point of connection. It's like this awareness that it could be you and the people that enter into these social ecologies, right? These different bubbles, it becomes very convincing. So that's one little lesson that, we're all, in a sense, potentially immersed in information ecologies, some of which lead potentially to violence. If we think about January 6th, far left extremism or far right extremism. And I should just note in my research, I researched the far right and I researched the far left through my work on the Cambodian genocide. So I have critiques that go against sort of extremism of any sort. So I kind of skipped over because I juggled this in. We'll see how far I get. I'm gonna do my best. But this presentation is going to be organized around 5 senses, and I've begun to tell you about the first one, which is touch. I'm going to go quickly through taste and hearing and sound, and then dive a little more deeply in terms of sight and smell, and end up with balance and movement, which are also senses, which you may or may not know. Someone said, "Oh, we should take account of balance," and yeah. So, anyways, there are 8 senses. So we'll see if we get there. And I probably am going to have to cut through a big chunk of what I was going to talk about, but I can just articulate it. So you let me know when I have about maybe 10 minutes left, and then maybe 2 minutes left or something like that. Okay, and then I can, because I forgot to start my watch because I was doing the long thread. Yeah, so we're on touch. So I just wanted to give you any anthropology majors, please have one. Come on. Not even one. One? Come on. Yes. Anyone else besides you? There's usually one other anthropologist in the room, so today it's you. It's okay. I'm going to share some of our secrets. Yeah, so when I teach anthro, I often teach classes. I have a class called True Crime, which is about perpetrator motivation. And I have a class on human rights. I always do the matrix. People are like, the matrix, what does that have to do with anthropology? So I go on for a long time. But basically, I assume about half of you have watched The Matrix at some point. How many of you have seen The Matrix? Yeah, okay, nobody's sort of Steve. Man, everyone's seen The Matrix, right? There's a lot packed in there. In fact, I often use it with Plato's simile allegory of the cave. I don't know if anyone's read that. It's like a direct influence on everything that's going on in The Matrix. A very explicit reference. But, it's this notion that you go into a reality from an outside position. And when you go into that reality, as I did in Cambodia, I didn't understand anything. My methods professor was very unorthodox. He was a very famous Norwegian anthropologist, Frederick Barth. And he went to 13 different societies. He had, I don't know what it would be, auditory, like not photographic memory, but auditory memory. And he could learn a language in 3 weeks. Can you imagine that? Yeah, incredible. But he said, basically, here's what you do as an anthropologist. We'll see if this is what you've been taught for your methods class. Number one, the number one thing is you hang out. You just go and see what happens. So I could be an anthropologist in this room observing me and all of us doing ethnography right now. We call it participant observation. Sometimes you're just observing. So when I'm at CPAC, I'm observing. I'm not participating. I'm participating in the sense that I'm there and I'm present and I'm attending everything. And so you hang out, you interview people, and these different methods, though, you learn the language. But like when I went to Cambodia, even though I'd done language training, it's really hard. So I assume many of you have had the experience of learning a language and going to a place, and you make a lot of mistakes. And his thing was basically you make mistakes and you build up models of how things work. And that was his secret to his 13, dozen books, something like that, 13 different societies ranging from Bhutan, Guinea, parts of Pakistan now, all over the place. So you basically have to learn to read the code. So I have this book, Man or Monster, which is about a Khmer Rouge torturer who was put on trial. So part of my research deals with the Cambodian genocide. I'm going into details about it. 75 to 79, I interviewed former torturers, people involved in mass killings, as well as lots of victims. This was the head of an interrogation center. But if you look here, you look at the script and you don't, unless you speak Khmer, you have no idea how to read it, right? That's like the code you have to dive into. There is, however, not sure you can make it out quite there, the word evil. So this sort of gets into the little thing about how we read code, we project our own beliefs into it. So we look at him, I'm not time to go into it, but you see his eyes. Many people from a Judeo-Christian tradition would think demonic, right? Looks crazed. But in Cambodia, it actually is a symbol of ignorance, right? Eyes rubbed out, couldn't see. And Buddhist thought that's a reason why people commit evil acts. There's not really a word for evil, so it'd be like very bad acts that then impact your karma. Yeah, so it's like reading the code. Here, anybody remember, this is 2018, Tree of Life Synagogue that was shot up by this guy, Robert Bowers. He was recently put on trial. So yeah, he was far right. So he had a radar gun on his Gab. How many of you have heard of Gab? It's like a conservative platform. There's no reason really to go there unless you're studying far-right extremist groups, because a lot of them are on Gab, just like they're on Telegram. Now they're on X, I guess, as well. They're back again, I should say. But he had 1488. So in my book, It Can Happen Here, I have a little chapter unpacking 1488 in the meeting. Anybody know what 1488 stands for? Yeah.
The 14 is short for 14 words.
Yes.
The 88 is short for
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So if you ever see someone with that 1488 tattoo, they've got the 14 words of white genocide, and they're doing H.H. Heil Hitler. Yeah, so, anyways, I get it in the book and I unpack that. So when I go to CPAC, I'm basically unpacking the code, the semiotics in a different environment. And so, like, how do you do that? Well, and this maybe connects as well. There's actually a group, EDIOS, I think it's a foundation they're meeting right now, and it is a group, I believe Protestant, I'm not sure, maybe it's multi-denominational. They're holding an online conference about how to sort of depolarize and build bridges. And they were just talking about empathy, but they had retranslated it into a Christian framework. I'm digressing a little bit, it's literally going on as we speak here. They were talking about different types of empathy. And what we do in anthropology is, we have empathy, empathetic, and so in one sense, you try and get in the mind of what's going on with people, and then you also try and connect with how they might feel. And this is where you get to the moment that I shared with this guy, Rich Logis from Leaving MAGA, of sort of understanding in a felt way and responding in an emotive way to what's going on around you. And that's where I sort of was like, look, I can understand it. I was in there. It was like I was feeling with. It wasn't just cognitive, it was affective as well. So that's what we do as anthropologists. So I'm going to go a little more quickly. So the taste. Well, what's the taste of something when you're there? What do you do when you arrive? I always go to the exhibition hall, and you look around. This is 2023 when I was there, and you sort of see what the artifacts are, to use our anthropological language. Take a lot of photos, look at what people are wearing. 2024, Trump came and used this thing, I am your warrior, I am your justice, and I'll be your retribution. That's still, some people argue, are informing current policy. And this is from the last CPAC, some of the images. So, get a taste for it. Listening is absolutely critical as well. And so when you listen, what exactly is going on? Well, they have lots of sessions with lots of different titles. Actually 2023 and 2024 have better titles. I think they got a little frustrated this year because after winning so decisively, it's like it's harder to fight against things when you're in power. And so their titles weren't so saucy this year, but they had a few. And they lambasted Joy Reid from MSNBC, and they had some others as well. So I sit and I listen to everything. I take constant notes, and I'm writing up, doing thematic analysis as I'm going along. So Bannon, Elon Musk, President Trump, Vance spoke, everyone. Homans, the director, the czar of immigration czar. The other thing is when you're there, you're listening for silences, what's not spoken about. So in this context, you'll never hear any mention of the suffering of people in Gaza, but you'll hear a lot about, this was being used at the time because the children who were just returned their remains, like words like Hamas savagery. So again, you know, sort of don't cross the box, you don't go off message, everyone stays within it. Global warming, it's all about the green scam instead of, nobody mentions climate change. There's enormous animus towards the trans community, but nobody really wants to talk about gay marriage because you also have a number of people who are conservative who aren't really happy about it, but you have also lots of Republicans, including someone who spoke, who is gay and married, and so like a tension, so nobody brings it up. You know, nobody, and so what do you call it, J6 crimes? Nobody mentions crimes. So there's silences, so you also attend to those sorts of silences. Yeah, so moving into the site. So we have touch, trying to empathize, understand from within. We have hearing, listening. We have taste, getting a sense for a place. And then we have sight, where we begin to get to the level of analysis. So, you know, at this CPAC, I know because I go to other MAGA events, and I've been to one in December, and I was struck that people were referring already, this was like a month after the election, to the golden age. I hadn't really heard that before. So I was pretty sure, especially after it was the first line of Trump's inauguration speech, was that we're in a golden age. And sure enough, when I got there, you know, it was all over the place. It was mentioned by many speakers. So when I'm there, I'm also writing in real time, because when you do public facing writing, you have to write up what's going on. So, you know, this is in terms of sight. So you take in, you listen, you begin to analyze. And so this is the beginning of the analysis. I'm not gonna be able to do much with it was actually the biggest part of my presentation, believe it or not. You know, the other part, but you know, this gives you a sense for what's going on. So, you know, I talked about the journey, and this is how within the MAGAverse, Trump is depicted often in this hero's journey, who fights through a number of different obstacles, and eventually it comes to power. And people often say, well, he's doing all these horrible things if they're in the left-leaning bubble, right? It's the end of the world. One thing that's been weird about this research is everybody, you know, in these bubbles who lean to the right say there's a radical left apocalypse of socialism, and then people looking from the left-leaning bubble looking at the right say there's this fascist apocalypse, and so the same terms are getting used. But you know, so this configures within the sort of warrior hero myth. People say, you know, like, because he's like a wrecking ball, a bull in a china shop. You may have heard this one also being used. And we see with Doge, that's exactly what he promised and what the expectation is. So a lot of people are surprised by it, but actually within the context, some people are surprised it's going so fast, but this is what he's supposed to do from their perspective. You know, on the other hand, he has the Midas touch and has a book called The Midas Touch. And this idea that anything he does, so we saw, maybe you saw the video that came out yesterday with Gaza being turned into a sort of golden city, right? It becomes a Trump city. How many of you saw that video that was circulating? Some people, yeah, can't come out. So it's this idea that whatever he does is gonna be fantastic. And then you have the state of American exceptionalism restored. You know, people wonder why I was asked this to write something before the election on why people were supporting Trump, because I was doing a lot of research, and it was pretty clear, you know, bread and butter, economy, immigration, 1, 2, the sort of hostility towards quote unquote woke issues, but you also get this thing, the MAGA bull in a shop, proven record. Again, with cite, this is analysis. We're not at the point of critique, which is the next step. But I've also been looking to see sort of who is demonized at CPAC. We have the language I mentioned before of us and them. So 2023, it's often wokeism, the deep state, the trans queer identity, China, border cartels, the radical left. And it kind of shifts in emphasis from time to time, but these remain. China is sort of always there in the backdrop, but this continued into the present. And radical left Marxists are, of course, the woke or primary targets, but especially the deep state, this language that we're using is a primary target. So I'm going to summarize in like a minute what was the bulk of my presentation, which was, so there's the level of trying to understand and do explainers to a public audience about how people are thinking inside this bubble. I also wrote an article, Why People Voted for Harris. I did one for both sides. But yeah, so there are a number of moments. I could have started with the I shouldn't have done that. I just like did a neuron thing with Bannon there. Sorry, disregard that. Cut that off the footage. I was going to say with the Bannon salute or the chainsaw from Musk.
We're gonna put it on TikTok.
It's probably already there. Oh boy, I'm in trouble. We'll move on quickly from there. But if I had time, I would have landed on comments that Musk made during his interview, and he brought up this notion that Democrats had a policy and a plan to bring in, as they're called there, quote unquote aliens. They don't say undocumented immigrants. It's always aliens, illegal aliens, or illegals. That's sort of the vernacular that's used because they wanted to increase the number of Democratic voters. So I don't have a lot of time. I was going to tell you, go back to J.D. Vance's remarks about Haitian pet eaters. Maybe some of you remember that controversy in Springfield, Ohio.
The song, we all remember the song.
You remember the song? How many remember the song? No? No?
You know that song? Eating the pets.
Okay, well, so put that on TikTok. Yeah, so anyways, but, basically, this is the language of the Great Replacement that has a long history dating back in the US to sort of nativism back in 1850s, 1840s, forward, demonization of immigrant groups, often with language of invasion, and the notion that these groups are a threat to the white population, although it also gets reworked as sort of our traditions and it can have a slightly larger umbrella. And this sort of recurs through time. There flows between Europe and back again. During Nazi Germany, this was the language. The Jews were coming. It was an invasion. They were infesting the country. They were going to potentially wipe out the white population. And so back with the 14 words, which is linked to the White Genocide Manifesto, there's this long history to this type of thinking. In the context of the US, Jews are usually viewed as the sort of evil people who are manipulating other black and brown peoples to try and genocide the white population. In Europe, especially more recently, if you go back to like Anders Breivik, the Norway shooter, it's usually the Muslim community that are the invaders. So you have different, wherever you are, it's kind of localized, you have different groups. Sorry, I don't know why I ended up.
Alex, let's do questions, because I think the question is very.
I got 1 minute, I gotta hit the landing point.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
1 point.
Yeah, this is NSC 131. So, yeah, so this language, so that's the notion of critique, right? Analysis, critique is unpacking, does something pass the smell test? Is there more here? Is there something I should be noting and pointing out? So the last thing, too many slides you didn't really believe me that a bunch of slides, did you? Yeah, a lot of stuff. I told you I didn't get to my, look at that. Of course, I could have just put those in there so I could say I was going to get to them. But this is sort of the end point, right? Through touch, through listening, through taste, through smell, but especially listening. Those senses that I've been using as a metaphor provide the groundwork for moral compass. And moral compass provides a way to navigate difficult situations, to burst out of our bubbles and enter into other spaces where people think differently. So we have the title of Inclusive Communities. How do we navigate troubling times? But all of these moves are necessary as part of a moral life to do it, and to sort of extend the metaphor, they give us balance and they enable movement. And so to wrap up, I began by mixing together words that are highly contentious, some for the right, some for the left, but certainly words like DEI, CRT, diversity, inclusion, that are particularly fraught. Some people are afraid to say them or to write about them. But I also mixed in patriotism, faith and family, and other words that again are ones that are foregrounded in contexts where people lean to the right. That is an act of just articulating language that's fraught, and a small illustration of how we all have to sort of take an assessment of where we are at this moment, and regardless of your political perspective, whether it's right, left, or center, to act, but to act from this moral foundation of deep understanding. So anyways, I want to leave you with the senses, and I'll leave you there, and I'm sorry I didn't get into the replacement, but I gave you time.
So let's take questions from students. Any questions about slides, or what do you think?
Why do you
Speak
think?
up a little bit. Stand up. Who
Why
are
do
you?
you think?
Who are you?
Who are you? What's your name?
Jimmy. Why do you think these groups form, like on both sides, like really far on the left and really far on the right? Why do you think people are so blinded by their own bubble?
It's a great question. It's also a big question. You know, why do people fight? Why do they go to war? You know, I spent a lot of my career writing about this in the context of genocide and mass violence. You know, one way to start is from a very granular level. And if we want to go back to, since you were saying about anthropology major, to the word culture, the etymology of it is cultivation. We all grow up like a petri dish, right, in a context that gives rise to our sense of being. They form our subjectivity, our sense of self, our sense of identity. So from the get-go, it's not like we just move into them. We're already formed in a bubble, if you will, of our upbringing, of our childhood. Going out of your bubble, your culture, that which gives your life meaning, is uncomfortable. It's not, critical thinking is not, what is it? It's very difficult. Because ultimately, if critical thinking is taken to the point where ultimately it should go, it can destabilize much of what you believe in. And so a lot of people don't want to do it. So, you know, why do people immerse? One reason is it's scary to think critically. You know, you get the scene, so the scene in The Matrix, to sort of bring that up again, take the red pill or blue pill, or it's like, I'm gonna take the red pill, you know. Okay, well, what's the red pill? So if we go back, I was gonna talk about the White Genocide Manifesto, they use the language of red pilling. So neo-Nazis say, well, we have the red pill for you, you know, but it's basically a red pill of neo-Nazi ideology. If you go to the incel community, right, you also have the pill languages used. Actually, Interfaith was also flown back to the US, that's a little bit of an aside. So it's really difficult because ultimately, for those who are really big Matrix fans, you have to go to the train station. Anybody remember the train station? This is like Matrix 3, you know, or something like that. They have like the space that's not in one reality or the other, but it's kind of betwixt and between. And they call it the train station. There's also the white room where before they go into simulation. But those are uncomfortable spaces. So why do people do that? Well, first of all, it feels good. When I'm with, you know, thousands of people at CPAC who believe what they're saying, are passionate about, they're happy, they're giddy, you feel it. I mean, there's an sociologist, Durkheim, who talked about effervescence, right? Bubbling up. I mean, it's contagious. It feels good. You know what else? It feels good to be right. There's absolute certainty, conviction. Critical thinking is hard to do. So I would say it's the flip side, which is it's actually more unusual for people to break out of those sorts of bubbles. That's the hardest thing to do. But everybody wants to say, I'm in the position of, I'm a good person, it could never be me. And so that's part of the reason I mentioned the thing with my friend, anyways, when I was talking to the guy from leaving MAGA, is we have this connection because I was saying basically, it could be me too. Versus just saying, I'm above it, I could never do it. To me, the first step of genocide prevention is the acceptance that I could do really bad things in the right situation. Again, very uncomfortable thing. Most people don't want to think it. My students at the beginning of class, they don't want to think about it either. Anyway, so great question though. But you can go to graduate school and you can write a dissertation about it.
Go ahead.
My name's Shashir, and my question for you is, do you think that extremism as it manifests is equally harmful coming from both ends of the aisle?
Yes. Yeah. And people on both sides don't like to hear that. Extremism in any form, to me, it's this sort of paradox, because we're back to your question, which is the sort of land of pure certainty. To me, the ability to contain opposition is a difficult thing. And, we could do an evolutionary discussion of human beings' existential anxiety, growing up with the fact that we all have to constantly reduce, stereotype, and categorize. Imagine if we couldn't use abstract concepts and categorizations. We go insane. So on the get-go, whenever we think we're effectively reducing, simplifying, caricaturing, stereotyping, and there's a philosopher Adorno, and actually a number of people who talk about reification, thingification, and it's like really difficult to get to the point where you can constantly try and be self-aware of doing this. It's really difficult. And so when we move to the extremes, those are the area where people aren't questioning. So I'm wary of extremism, right or left, and again, people on the left especially don't like it. When I'm asked this, they tend to like it less than people on the right. But there's a thing called horseshoe theory, where the two ends meet. You've heard of it, yeah. And there's some truth to that, I think. Yeah, it's another great question.
Thank you.
Okay, another student question, then Jim, I'll come here. Any other students? Alex?
So how, as like an individual, do you inoculate yourself from this like miasma thought that like takes over and makes you feel good?
Yeah, well, I think I'm trained as an anthropologist, and so I have actually training, that's sort of one level of it. So people say, how can you go into these contexts? And I'm like, well, I've been doing it my whole career. If you go to a personal level, I grew up in a family where my father was a psychiatrist. I have two brothers who are psychiatrists. And so sort of the psyche, the notion, my father is, Carl Jung, people know Carl Jung? He's a Jungian psychiatrist. So I grew up, he has this concept of the shadow, and it was like a huge concept. So we were continually sort of thinking through this sort of thing. It was just a common topic of conversation in the household. How do many of us sort of contain it? That's an interesting question. And I'm actually just wrote a chapter in a book that I'm writing that sort of dives into this. So I think there are a number of different ways for me as an individual to do that, but I think you can also have training, methodological, that does it. And I think empathy, so the last thing I'll say, to go back to Idios, which is having this meeting, and they were talking about empathy, they sort of got to this point where when you have deep empathy, what do you do when you're so deeply into it that you're sort of taking on the emotions and beliefs of a person who may believe very different things? And there's actually disagreement about it, and there's concern sort of like you're raising about what happens to the individual in that situation. Like I say, critical thinking in doing this is uncomfortable. Holding tensions and oppositions in sort of an open way is not something that's easy to do. you know, and maybe most people don't wanna do it and can't do it. Probably most people can't, to sort of go back to that question. I don't know how many surveyed, but I just, you know, to me, I'm sort of giving a notion of human nature. That this is part of the challenge of being human, and ultimately going back to that notion of moral compass. Because you know what the easiest thing is? Say, well, I have moral compass, I'm right. Right? But to go back to those senses, all those different steps that I'm saying we need to take in order to have a robust, if you will, moral compass. That to me is the ethical point of action. But most people say, oh yeah, I just have my beliefs, that's it, they're right. It feels good. Feels good to be right. Everyone, when I say that, everyone knows that, right? I'm right, feels good. Doesn't feel good to say, oh, I was wrong.
So would you say doubt then? Doubt is an inoculation? Having doubt?
I mean, questioning, I would say. I mean, I also believe that people can have faith, people can have conviction. But, you know, in this book, Matter Monster, that I wrote, I talk about effacing conviction, which is where you have conviction that erases the face of the other, this pure certainty, versus one that has gone through this sort of compassionate understanding, engagement with other sorts of people. You know, so inoculation is a hard one because there is no sort of silver bullet. It's never a good metaphor to use because it's a bullet, but there's no one sort of thing. It depends on the person, depends on their place. People come to it from different routes. But for the most part, maybe inoculation is not questioning. Maybe that's the point of inoculation, because if you don't question, you don't need to worry about it. You just live in your bubble. It feels good. Especially, you know, I'm there, people are yelling, I get Stockholm syndrome.
Jim, you wanna ask?
Jim Sheehan, campus administrator at State University. How much did the conference cost? And what was the predominant ethnic group at the conference?
Sorry, what was it?
How much did the conference cost a participant?
Oh, well, they're, you know, it's interesting, I think they're competing with, another group, Turning Point USA. And so they brought the cost down, so actually the cost of CPAC, are under $100 now, the prices go up. Yeah, so, but they have the VIP section. You know, I always say, well, I should go, you know, which is a lot more. And I'm always like, I should go to the VIP section at first because I want to be in there as an anthropologist. But then I realize as soon as I go in there as a VIP, that's it for me, they're gonna kick me out. Because I'm gonna get the questions, so.
But the second question is, what was the predominant ethnic group?
Predominantly white. But, you know, one thing with Trump 1.0 and 2.0, you know, is that actually it's a much more diverse coalition, as probably most people are aware. And so even 2023, 24 versus now, there's more diversity to it. And if you go to Turning Point USA, to one of their events, for example, there's much more diversity. So really, it kind of depends on the context. But the context of CPAC is predominantly white, tends to be older. If you go to Turning Point USA, their conference tends to be younger. You know, still majority white, but younger. So it depends where you go, different audiences. Essentially, there was also an article in the New York Times today about how you've had an uptick in the number of people, right, who have young people who are becoming Christians. It's like the first time it's been straight down and slightly ticked up. I don't know if that has something to do with Turning Point. How many of you have heard of Turning Point? How many of you have seen a Turning Point video where Charlie Kirk debates like 45 liberal students? Yeah, you're saying that? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he may have won the election for Trump, possibly, but that's a different story.
Okay, one last question or comment or something that's on your mind related to whatever class is.
With him. I mean, the historical demographic of Trump supporters have been older, white, evangelical, right? That's been sort of the dominant group. And so, but now it's diversified a little bit.
Any questions?
Free to ask a question, because you know I'm gonna talk a long time if I get one of those
Right here.
questions. Oh, okay.
Do you ever get to like interview the speakers when you go to something like this? Like, are they like out like talking to people or not really?
No, CPAC is, if you're in the VIP lounge, then you're gonna get that, right? That's why I wanna go in that old VIP lounge, where it probably costs $1,000, I don't know what it is, it's a lot of money, but, that's where they go and they interact. I'm out with the people, you know, I'm one of thousands of people. These are not Q&A events. You are spoken to, and that's part of the reason it becomes very convincing, because over and over again, everyone's on message. In between their commercials, nonstop going, over and over again, it's nonstop, pyrotechnics, all sorts of stuff. No, there's no Q&A. Turning Point has a little bit of Q&A, but not much. Because what does Q&A do? Well, it opens up the possibility, right, to sort of rupture what's going on, or for someone to cross the boss. So, no Q&A. Anyways, great questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Everyone, please fill out an evaluation form so HDI can do better, meaning I can do better for events. Our next event is next Thursday, March 6th at 4 o'clock, same room, on social media and information and disinformation. So that's another event that I'd really like you guys to attend. Thank you for coming.